The emergency signal from Deep Space Station Omega-7 reached Earth Command at 1400 hours, Greenwich Mean Time, setting off a chain of events that would change humanity forever. Within minutes, encrypted communications flew between military bases, government buildings, and research facilities around the globe. The message was simple but earth-shaking. Humanity had received its first communication from an alien species, and that species was dying. President Helen Brooks was in a budget meeting when her chief of staff burst through the door with the news. At 53 years old, Brooks had led the United Earth government through economic crises and colonial disputes, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She immediately called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council, summoning military leaders, scientists, and politicians from around the world to Geneva. Admiral Chris Parker arrived at the emergency meeting still wearing his dress uniform from a promotion ceremony he had abandoned in Washington. As head of the United Earth Defense Force, Parker commanded humanity's entire space fleet, 12 warships designed for system defense and patrol duties. The admiral was a cautious man who had built his career on careful planning and risk assessment, and everything about the Villani situation screamed danger to his experienced mind. Dr. Amanda Wells rushed to Geneva from her laboratory in London, where she had been studying theoretical alien biology for the past decade. As Earth's leading expert on xenobiology, she had always believed that first contact would be humanity's greatest opportunity to learn and grow. She never imagined it would come in the form of a species begging for help against genocidal conquerors. The council meeting began with a full briefing on the Villani transmission. Translation teams had worked around the clock to decode every nuance of the alien message, and the picture they painted was horrifying. The hegemony was not just conquering the Villani, they were systematically destroying everything that made them unique. Villani art, literature, and culture were being erased. Their children were being taken from their families and raised as servants for other species. Admiral Parker spoke first, his voice heavy with the weight of military responsibility. Earth's fleet was designed to protect human colonies and trade routes, not to fight an interstellar war against unknown alien technology. The 12 ships under his command carried crews of 40,000 people, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers who had signed up to defend humanity, not to die in alien space for creatures they had never met. We know nothing about hegemony military capabilities, Parker argued. Their technology could be centuries ahead of ours. We could be sending our entire fleet to destruction, and for what? We cannot save the Villani if we are all dead, and we certainly cannot protect Earth if we throw away our only defense force on a mission that has almost no chance of success. Dr. Wells disagreed passionately, her scientific mind focused on the broader implications of the situation. If humanity ignored the Villani plea for help, what kind of species would they prove themselves to be? More importantly, what would happen when the hegemony finished with the Villani and started looking for new worlds to conquer? Earth was young and weak compared to the galactic powers, but it was also rich in resources and populated by a species that had not yet been broken by conquest. This is not just about saving the Villani, Wells argued. This is about what kind of civilization we want to be when we take our place among the stars. Do we want to be the species that hides while innocents are slaughtered, or do we want to be the ones who stand up to evil even when the odds are against us? The debate raged for hours as politicians, military officers, and scientists argued about humanity's responsibility to help other species. Some pointed out that Earth had its own problems, poverty, disease, and environmental damage that still needed attention and resources. Others argued that helping the Villani was a moral imperative that transcended practical concerns about cost and risk. Meanwhile, news of the alien message had begun leaking to the public despite government efforts to keep it classified. Social media exploded with translations of the Villani transmission, and the emotional impact was immediate and overwhelming. The final words of the message, asking only to be remembered, struck something deep in the human heart. Protest crowds gathered outside government buildings in every major city on Earth. Veterans of human wars spoke at rallies about the duty to protect the innocent. Religious leaders called for action based on moral principles that transcended species boundaries. A global poll conducted by news organizations showed that 78% of humans supported military intervention. To help the Villani, the leaked message spread across every form of media, translated into hundreds of human languages. Children drew pictures of the Villani based on biological data from the transmission. Musicians composed songs about their struggle. Writers penned articles comparing the hegemony to the worst tyrants in human history. The alien species that humanity had never met became the most talked about topic on Earth. Back in Geneva, President Brooks watched the global reaction with growing amazement. She had expected fear and confusion when news of alien contact broke, but instead she saw something else entirely: anger. Humans were not afraid of the hegemony. They were furious that such cruelty could exist in the universe. The same species that had fought 2 world wars over freedom and dignity was not about to stand by while another species suffered the same fate. The president called for a final vote. After 18 hours of continuous debate, the decision was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth would answer the Villani call for help. Every available warship would be mobilized for the longest military deployment in human history. Civilian vessels would be converted to carry troops and supplies across 400 light-years of space. Admiral Parker accepted his orders with professional resignation, but privately he began planning for what might be humanity's finest hour, or its greatest disaster. The fleet would need months to prepare for interstellar warfare against unknown enemies using unknown weapons. Every ship would have to be retrofitted with improved systems. Every crew would need training for combat scenarios they could barely imagine. President Brooks addressed the world that evening from the United Nations building in New York. Her speech was brief and simple, but it captured the moment perfectly. "Today we learned that we are not alone in the universe," she said. "We also learned that evil exists among the stars just as it exists on Earth, but we are still the same species that has always stood against darkness. The Villani asked for help, and we will give it." The message humanity sent back to the Villani was even simpler: "Hold on, help is coming." The human fleet assembled at Luna Station was unlike anything that had ever left Earth's solar system. Admiral Karen Stone stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching through the massive viewports as 15 ships prepared for humanity's first interstellar war. The flagship was one of Earth's newest heavy cruisers, but even she was designed for patrol duties rather than the kind of combat they might face in alien space, alongside the military vessels. Hastily converted civilian ships carried supplies, medical equipment, and additional personnel. The cruise liner Pacific Dream now bristled with defensive weapons and housed 3,000 Marines. The cargo hauler New Horizon had been transformed into a mobile repair facility. Every ship in the fleet had been modified in the 3 months since President Brooks made her historic decision. Stone had been chosen to lead the expedition not because she was the most senior admiral, but because she understood what this mission really meant. At 42 years old, she had commanded ships in the asteroid belt conflicts and the Mars colonial disputes. She knew how to fight, but more importantly, she knew how to inspire people to fight for something bigger than themselves. The journey to Villani space would take 8 months, even at maximum faster-than-light speed. During those months, the fleet would become a mobile training ground as 50,000 humans prepared for combat against alien technology. Dr. Neil Foster had been assigned to develop countermeasures for weapons they had never seen, while Chief Engineer Bobby Clark worked to upgrade human systems with whatever improvements they could manage. The first month of the journey was the hardest for morale. Earth fell behind them, becoming just another star in the vast darkness. Many crew members had never been away from the solar system before, and the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were traveling across 400 light-years to fight an enemy that had conquered 12 other species. The odds of success seemed impossibly small. Admiral Stone addressed this problem by sharing everything they learned about the Villani with every person in the fleet. She wanted her people to understand exactly who they were trying to save. The translation teams had decoded thousands of Villani cultural files embedded in the distress signal revealing a species that valued art, learning, and peaceful cooperation above all else. The Villani had never started a war in their recorded history, but they had fought with desperate courage when attacked. Dr. Foster spent his days in the laboratory developing new weapons and defensive systems based on theoretical alien technology. Working with incomplete data was frustrating, but he approached the problem like solving a puzzle. If the hegemony used energy weapons, humans would need better armor. If they used kinetic weapons, humans would need better shields. Foster's team worked around the clock to give their fleet every possible advantage. The converted civilian ships proved to be unexpected assets during the long journey. The Pacific Dream's entertainment facilities became training centers where Marines practiced combat scenarios. The New Horizons cargo bays were turned into workshops where engineers built new equipment. The luxury yacht Golden Star became a communications hub that monitored alien transmissions throughout the region. 3 months into the journey, the fleet intercepted another Villani transmission that changed everything. The message was weaker than the original distress call, transmitted from a different location with clearly inferior equipment. The Villani capital city had fallen to hegemony ground forces. Their orbital defenses were destroyed. Only 3 cities remained under Villani control, and those were under constant bombardment. The updated transmission included tactical information that Dr. Foster found extremely valuable. The Villani described hegemony weapons in detail: energy beams that could melt through metal, kinetic projectiles that struck with incredible force, and defensive shields that seemed nearly impenetrable. But they also described weaknesses they had discovered through desperate experimentation. Chief Engineer Clark used this information to retrofit the human ships with new defensive systems. Human armor was redesigned to deflect energy weapons rather than absorb them. Human weapons were modified to fire in coordinated patterns that might overwhelm alien shields. Every ship in the fleet received upgrades that pushed human technology to its absolute limits. The psychological impact of the second Villani message was devastating and inspiring at the same time. The alien species was clearly losing their war, but they were still fighting. Their latest transmission included detailed star charts showing hegemony, fleet positions, and tactical assessments of enemy capabilities. Even facing defeat, the Villani were trying to help whoever might come to their aid. 6 months into the journey, the human fleet encountered its first alien technology. Long-range sensors detected automated patrol drones near the edge of hegemony space. These machines were clearly designed to detect and intercept any ships approaching Villani territory. Admiral Stone made the decision to engage them in order to test human weapons against alien defenses. The battle lasted only minutes, but it taught the humans valuable lessons. Human projectile weapons were surprisingly effective against alien shields, which seemed designed to stop energy weapons rather than kinetic impacts. Human tactics, developed through centuries of warfare between equally matched opponents, confused the artificial intelligence systems that controlled the drones. Dr. Foster analyzed the wreckage of the destroyed drones and made a shocking discovery. Hegemony technology was advanced but specialized. Their weapons were designed for intimidation and occupation rather than warfare against determined resistance. The drones carried devastating firepower, but their defensive systems had obvious weaknesses that a clever enemy could exploit. As the fleet approached Villani space, scout ships began sending back reconnaissance reports that confirmed humanity's worst fears. Massive hegemony vessels surrounded the Villani homeworld like predators circling wounded prey. Smaller ships moved constantly between the planet and larger transport vessels clearly engaged in moving prisoners or cargo. The Villani fleet had been completely destroyed, with debris fields marking the locations of their final battles. The final Villani transmission reached the human fleet just hours before they arrived in the system. The message was barely coherent, transmitted from emergency equipment with failing power systems. Only 3 cities remained under Villani control, and those were surrounded by hegemony ground forces. The transmission ended with words that would haunt every human who heard them. To whoever received our call, do not blame yourselves. You tried. Admiral Stone gathered her command staff as the fleet prepared to drop out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Villani system. 15 human ships against a hegemony fleet that had conquered an entire star system. Military doctrine suggested retreat and regrouping, but Stone looked at the faces around her and saw the same determination that had brought them across 400 light-years of space. The time for preparation was over. Humanity was about to announce its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Villani system and immediately faced the most overwhelming sight any of them had ever witnessed. 47 hegemony warships surrounded the blue-green planet that was the Villani homeworld, their massive hulls dwarfing anything in the human fleet. Transport vessels moved like worker ants between the planet's surface and larger cargo ships, clearly engaged in the systematic removal of prisoners and resources. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, studying the tactical display with growing anger. The hegemony fleet was spread out in a loose formation that spoke of complete confidence in their superiority. They were not expecting any resistance, certainly not from the primitive species that had just arrived at the outer edge of their sensor range. The alien ships were beautiful in a cold, mechanical way, but Stone could only see them as the instruments of genocide. Commander Steve Walsh reported from the fighter bay that his pilots were ready for immediate launch. The conversion of civilian vessels had allowed the fleet to carry twice as many fighters as originally planned, giving them 300 small craft that could move faster and hit harder than the larger ships. Walsh knew that his pilots were about to face technology far beyond anything they had trained for, but their determination was absolute. Captain Lucy Evans aboard the frigate USS Courage sent a message to all ships requesting permission to begin the attack. Her vessel was one of the smallest in the fleet, carrying only 800 crew members, but Evans had volunteered to lead the first assault wave. She understood that someone had to test the hegemony defenses, and she was prepared to sacrifice her ship to give the rest of the fleet tactical information. Admiral Stone faced the same impossible decision that had haunted military leaders throughout human history. Military doctrine demanded careful reconnaissance, detailed planning, and overwhelming force before engaging a superior enemy. But every minute they waited meant more Villani civilians being loaded onto transport ships bound for slavery. Every hour of delay meant more death and suffering for the species that had asked for help. The Admiral made the most human decision possible. She ordered an immediate attack against impossible odds. The human fleet would dive straight toward the planet, using its gravity well and debris fields for cover. They would ignore the main hegemony battle fleet and focus entirely on destroying the transport ships and freeing as many Villani prisoners as possible. It was tactically insane and absolutely necessary. The Battle of Villani Prime began with 15 human ships, accelerating at maximum speed toward the planet while 300 fighters spread out in attack formation. The hegemony fleet reacted with surprise and then contempt as their sensors analyzed the primitive vessels approaching them. The alien commanders had fought dozens of species over the centuries, and they all followed the same pattern: surrender negotiations followed by token resistance followed by complete capitulation. Commander Walsh led his fighter squadrons in the first attack, targeting the transport ships that were clearly engaged in moving Villani prisoners. His pilots flew their small craft like missiles, diving through defensive fire that lit up space around them. Human fighters were faster and more maneuverable than anything the hegemony had faced before, and their willingness to fly kamikaze missions confused the alien defensive systems. The first transport ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light as Walsh's fighters overwhelmed its shields with concentrated fire. Emergency pods began launching from the dying vessel, carrying Villani prisoners back toward their homeworld. The sight of their people being rescued sent a surge of hope through the remaining Villani cities, and their final transmission was a cry of joy and disbelief that someone had actually come to help them. Captain Evans brought the USS Courage into close combat with a hegemony cruiser that was 3 times her size, using human tactics that the aliens had never encountered before. Instead of engaging in long-range dueling, Evans closed to point-blank range, where her smaller ship could maneuver around the enemy vessel's blind spots. Human weapons, crude but effective, punched through alien shields that were designed to stop more sophisticated energy weapons. The hegemony fleet began to respond with increasing alarm as more transport ships exploded under human attack. These primitive newcomers were not following any recognizable pattern of warfare. They seemed more concerned with saving civilians than with tactical advantage. They were willing to sacrifice their own ships to destroy vessels that had no military value. It made no sense to the alien commanders who had built their careers on intimidation and overwhelming force. Dr. Foster's predictions about hegemony technology proved accurate as the battle continued. The alien ships were designed for conquering helpless planets rather than fighting determined enemies. Their weapons were devastating but slow to target fast-moving human fighters. Their shields were nearly impenetrable but only from certain angles. Their tactics were based on fear rather than skill. Colonel Ron Baker led the first wave of human Marines to the planet's surface, using drop pods that fell like meteors through the atmosphere. The hegemony ground forces were caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of enemy soldiers in the middle of their occupation zones. Human infantry tactics, evolved through centuries of brutal ground warfare, proved devastatingly effective against aliens who had grown used to fighting demoralized enemies. The Villani, civilians who witnessed human soldiers fighting for their freedom, could barely believe what they were seeing. For 3 years, they had faced an enemy that seemed invincible, conquering world after world with casual efficiency. Now they watched as these strange aliens from a distant star fought with a fury that the hegemony had never encountered before. Human soldiers threw themselves into impossible situations to save Villani children and families. Captain Evans made the decision that would become legendary throughout the galaxy when her ship suffered critical damage from hegemony weapons. Instead of retreating or surrendering, she ordered her crew to evacuate and then rammed the USS Courage directly into the largest enemy transport ship. The explosion freed 10,000 Villani prisoners and sent a message that would echo across the stars for generations. The tide of battle turned as more human ships arrived in the inner system, their weapons tearing through hegemony formations that had never faced such desperate resistance. Admiral Stone coordinated the attack from the USS Liberty, but every captain fought their own battle with the same determination that had brought them across 400 light-years of space. They had come to save the Villani, and they would accept no outcome other than complete victory. Within 72 hours of the first attack, the hegemony fleet was in full retreat, abandoning their ground forces and fleeing toward the edge of the system. They left behind 23 destroyed warships and countless smaller vessels, along with the liberation of an entire world that they had considered conquered. The species that had never been defeated had suffered their first major loss to primitives, who fought with weapons that should have been useless against advanced technology. The silence that followed the hegemony retreat was unlike anything the Villani had experienced in 3 years of constant warfare. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching the last enemy ships disappear into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind a system littered with debris and hope. The human fleet had lost 6 ships and over 8,000 people, but they had achieved something that the galaxy thought impossible. They had defeated the hegemony in open battle. Prime Minister Keth Valdris was among the first Villani to board a human ship, his tall frame and delicate features still bearing the marks of malnutrition and stress from years of siege. When he met Admiral Stone in the Liberty's conference room, the alien leader's first words would become part of galactic history. "Why did you come so far to die for strangers?" he asked through the translation system that Dr. Foster's team had quickly developed. Stone's answer was simple and direct, reflecting the fundamental difference between humanity and every other species the hegemony had encountered. "Because it was right," she said. And those 4 words would be carved into monuments across a dozen worlds in the years that followed. The Admiral explained that humans had always fought against bullies and tyrants, even when the odds were against them. Freedom and justice were not. just political concepts to humanity, they were principles worth dying for, the rescued Villani could barely comprehend the scale of human sacrifice on their behalf. 8,000 humans had died in the battle, more than the entire remaining Villani military. These aliens had traveled 400 light-years and fought an enemy they had never seen before, all because of a single distress call sent into the void. The concept of such selfless courage was almost beyond their understanding. News of the Battle of Villani Prime spread across the galaxy through the same communication networks that the hegemony used to coordinate their empire. The impossible had happened. A primitive species had not only resisted the conquerors but had actually driven them away. More importantly, someone had finally stood up to the hegemony and won, proving that the galaxy's most feared empire was not invincible after all. The psychological impact of humanity's victory was immediate and devastating to hegemony control. On 5 different conquered worlds, slave populations rose in rebellion when they learned that resistance was possible. The Kalari, who had been enslaved for 30 years, seized control of their mining facilities and declared independence. The Thorian resistance movement emerged from hiding and began coordinating attacks on occupation forces across their homeworld. Dr. Amanda Wells arrived on Villani Prime 3 weeks after the battle, leading a team of scientists and medical personnel who had volunteered to help with reconstruction efforts. What she found there changed her understanding of what the hegemony represented. The aliens had not simply conquered the Villani, they had tried to erase them entirely. Villani art had been destroyed, their libraries burned, their cultural centers converted into processing facilities for slave selection. The human medical teams worked alongside Villani survivors to treat injuries and malnutrition that affected nearly the entire population. Dr. Wells documented evidence of systematic brutality that went far beyond military conquest. Villani children had been separated from their families based on genetic tests that determined their suitability for different types of slave labor. Elderly Villani had simply been eliminated as economically worthless. Chief Engineer Bobby Clark led the effort to restore Villani infrastructure, but he quickly realized that the hegemony had deliberately destroyed anything that could support independent civilization. Power plants had been dismantled, communication networks had been replaced with systems that only worked under hegemony control, and manufacturing facilities had been converted to produce goods for the conquerors rather than the local population. The broader galactic response to humanity's victory was swift and dramatic. Species that had hidden in remote systems for decades began sending messages of support and offers of alliance. The Nexari, who had avoided hegemony attention by pretending to be primitive, revealed that they possessed advanced technology and offered to share it with humanity. The Zephyrians, whose homeworld was threatened by hegemony expansion, requested immediate assistance from the human fleet. Admiral Stone found herself coordinating not just military operations but the foundation of something entirely new in galactic politics, an alliance based on mutual defense rather than conquest. The Galactic Liberation Alliance began as an informal cooperation between humanity and the Villani, but it quickly grew as other species requested membership and protection from hegemony retaliation. Back on Earth, President Brooks addressed the United Nations 6 months after the battle, announcing humanity's permanent commitment to galactic freedom. The liberation of Villani Prime had cost Earth dearly in ships and lives, but it had also revealed humanity's true place in the universe. They were not just another species seeking survival among the stars, they were the galaxy's conscience, the force that would stand against tyranny wherever it appeared. The hegemony leadership convened emergency councils on their capital world, facing the first existential threat to their empire in 3 centuries. Humanity represented something they had thought they had eliminated from the galaxy, a species that fought for principles rather than survival. Their military advisors recommended immediate action to destroy Earth before the human virus of resistance could spread further. Construction began on humanity's first interstellar naval base in orbit around Villani Prime, protected by both human and alien technology. The base would serve as headquarters for the Liberation Alliance and a symbol of what could be achieved when free species worked together. Recruitment stations opened on Earth as young humans volunteered for the new Galactic Liberation Fleet, inspired by the victory that had announced their species to the stars. The memorial wall in the base's central hub listed the names of every human who had died in the Battle of Villani Prime, from Admiral Evans, who had rammed her ship into the enemy, to Private Martinez, who had died protecting Villani children during the ground assault. Beneath their names was inscribed the message that had started it all, the Villani distress call that had awakened humanity's fury and changed the course of galactic history. The final entry in Admiral Stone's personal log captured the moment perfectly. Today we learn that we are not alone in facing evil, but we are also not alone in fighting it. The Villani called for help, and we answered. Tomorrow another species will call, and we will answer again. We always will, because that is who we are, the species that refuses to let darkness win without a fight. The base's dedication plaque bore a simple inscription that would inspire resistance movements across the galaxy. They called for help. We answered. We always will. Dr. Lisa Crawford rubbed her tired eyes as she stared at the massive array of screens surrounding her workstation. The Luna-based Deep Space Communications Center hummed quietly in the artificial night cycle, its walls lined with receivers pointed toward every corner of the galaxy. For 3 years, Lisa had monitored these channels, hoping to catch even the faintest whisper of intelligent life beyond Earth. Tonight felt different somehow, though she could not explain why. The clock showed 347 hours when the first anomaly appeared on her primary screen. A signal, faint but unmistakably artificial, emerged from the background radiation of deep space. Lisa's heart raced as she fine-tuned the receivers, bringing the transmission into sharper focus. The pattern was mathematical, sequential, and absolutely deliberate. This was not some random cosmic noise or equipment malfunction. This was a message. Commander Jake Morrison arrived within minutes of Lisa's emergency call. The tall, weathered officer had commanded Earth's outer defense perimeter for over a decade, and his experience showed in the way he quickly assessed the situation. He studied the signal data with growing excitement, his military training warring with scientific wonder. The transmission originated from the Kepler 442 system, over 1,200 light-years from Earth. Whatever had sent this message possessed technology far beyond human capability. The signal contained layers of information that took hours to decode. First came the mathematical sequences, prime numbers and universal constants that proved intelligence. Then star charts, detailed and precise, showing the location of the sender and dozens of other star systems. The logical data followed, describing an aquatic species with advanced technology and peaceful intentions. But it was the final layer that sent chills through everyone who saw it. Images of destruction filled the screens. Cities burning under alien skies. Ships fleeing through space. Many destroyed before they could escape. Bodies floating in what had once been oceans. The mathematical precision of the earlier transmission gave way to desperate, emotional pleas for help. This was not first contact. This was a death scream echoing across the void. President Helen Carter convened an emergency session of the United Earth Council within 6 hours of the transmission's discovery. Representatives from every nation and colony gathered in Geneva, their faces grim as they reviewed the alien data. The species called themselves the Zilani, and their message painted a terrifying picture of galactic civilization. They were not alone in the universe, but that was not the blessing humanity had hoped for. The Zilani spoke of an empire called the Dominion, a ruthless civilization that swept across star systems like a plague. They did not negotiate or show mercy. They simply arrived, conquered, and consumed everything in their path. Entire species vanished beneath their advance, their worlds stripped bare, and their populations enslaved or destroyed. The Zilani had fought bravely, but their peaceful nature had not prepared them for such brutality. Admiral Roy Sullivan studied the tactical data with the eye of a career soldier. The Dominion's military doctrine was simple and effective. They overwhelmed their enemies with superior numbers and technology, showing no interest in diplomacy or peaceful coexistence. What troubled him most was the methodical nature of their Expansion. This was not random conquest driven by greed or desperation. This was systematic extermination on a galactic scale. The Zilani's final gift to humanity was complete technological specifications for faster-than-light communication, advanced weaponry, and defensive systems. In their dying moments, they had transmitted everything they knew about Dominion tactics, ship designs, and forward base locations. They had given Earth the tools it would need to fight back, assuming humanity possessed the will to use them. Dr. Amanda Bell, Earth's leading expert in xenotechnology, worked frantically to verify the alien blueprints. Every equation checked out, every schematic was perfect. The Zilani had handed humanity a technological advantage that would have taken centuries to develop naturally. But with this gift came a terrible revelation buried in the final data packets. Earth was on the Dominion's target list. The discovery sent shockwaves through the council chambers. Intelligence analysis suggested the Dominion had been monitoring RADIO signals from Earth for over 50 years, cataloging human technology and assessing the threat level. Humanity had been marked for conquest before they even knew aliens existed. The Zilani's transmission had not just been a plea for help. It had been a warning. Captain Ryan Hughes, chief engineer of the Titan shipyards, found himself at the center of humanity's response planning. The alien technology offered possibilities beyond imagination, but implementing it would require unprecedented cooperation between Earth's military and civilian sectors. Every nation would need to contribute resources. Every shipyard would need to retool for war. Every scientist would need to master alien physics in a matter of months. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos commanded Earth's most elite Special Forces unit, but even her soldiers seemed inadequate for what was coming. The Dominion data showed enemy forces armed with energy weapons and powered armor that could shrug off conventional human weaponry. Her Marines would need complete retraining and re-equipment if they hoped to survive contact with such an advanced enemy. Colonel Danwright's intelligence networks began intercepting Dominion communications within weeks of cracking their encryption protocols. The translations were chilling. Humanity was classified as a developing threat scheduled for elimination within the next 5 years. Dominion forward scouts were already en route to the solar system, gathering final intelligence before the main invasion force arrived. The weight of the situation pressed down on everyone involved. Humanity faced an enemy with superior technology, vast numbers, and complete ruthlessness. The Zilani had possessed similar advantages and still fallen to Dominion forces. Earth's only hope lay in the alien gift of advanced technology and the element of surprise. President Carter addressed the world on a cold December morning, her words carefully chosen to inspire without causing panic. She spoke of humanity's greatest challenge and greatest opportunity. The universe was vast and dangerous, but Earth would not face it defensively. They would honor the Zilani's sacrifice by becoming the weapon their killers never expected. The transmission from Kepler 442 had changed everything. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, but they had learned this truth in the worst possible way. Their first alien contact had been a desperate cry for help from a dying civilization. Their introduction to galactic politics had come through, witnessing genocide on an unimaginable scale, but the Zilani had given humanity more than technology and tactical data. They had given them purpose. Earth would not simply defend itself against the coming storm. They would become the storm that swept the Dominion from the galaxy forever. The hunt was about to begin, and humanity intended to be the predator rather than the prey.